Everyone thinks they already understand how you make a plane fly farther. You add more fuel, bigger tanks, longer range, end of story. It is the kind of intuition that feels so obvious nobody bothers to question it, and it is wrong in a way that shaped the most ambitious aircraft in commercial aviation. On the 2nd of June 2026, a jet still wearing bare green protective primer lifted off from Toulouse, climbed past 41,000 feet and flew for 3 hours and 43 minutes before coming home. No airline colours yet, just a stencil on the fuselage marking it as the first of its kind. That aircraft, the Airbus A350-1000 ULR, is the machine that will fly Sydney to London non-stop, 10,573 miles, instantly the longest scheduled passenger flight on Earth, beating the current record holder by more than 1,000 miles in an industry where records usually move by a few hundred at a time. And here is the part that should bother you. The modification that makes this possible is, on paper, almost nothing. One extra fuel tank. Airbus calls it the rear center tank. It holds 20,000 litres and it extends the aircraft's range by 1,000 nautical miles. Sit with those two numbers for a second. 20,000 litres of jet fuel, an entire road tanker's worth, buys you 1,000 miles. On a plane this efficient, that exchange rate seems insane. It is not. It is the fuel math working exactly as physics demands, because that tank means carrying roughly 16,000 kilograms of extra kerosene, and hauling 16 tons of anything for 22 hours costs you dearly. The truly strange thing is that Qantas has faced this exact equation before. They solved it in 1943 with a flying boat that carried 3 passengers, and the name of this entire project is a direct tribute to it. We will get there, because before there was Project Sunrise, there was the Double Sunrise. In February 1942, Singapore fell to Japan, and with it fell the air route connecting Australia to England. The response, beginning in June 1943, was a top-secret operation flying from Perth across the Indian Ocean to Kagala Lake in Ceylon, modern Sri Lanka, roughly 3,500 nautical miles in consolidated PBY Catalina flying boats flown without radio communication to avoid detection by Japanese forces. The crossings took so long that passengers watched the sun rise twice between takeoff and touchdown, and Qantas commemorated it with a certificate inducting them into the Order of the Double Sunrise. Now look at what those flights actually required, because this is the fuel math stripped of every modern comfort. The Catalinas were gutted of all non-essential equipment, including de-icing gear and insulation. Average takeoff weight ran between 35,100 and 35,300 pounds, against an absolute maximum of 35,400. Inside that razor-thin margin, they carried 9,040 litres of fuel, and the weight of that fuel was so punishing that an average flight carried only 3 passengers and 152 pounds of essential mail. Read that again. A full-sized aircraft, a full crew, an ocean crossing of nearly 30 hours, and the payload was 3 human beings and a mail bag. Every additional kilogram of fuel was a kilogram of passenger deleted. The aeroplane had become a flying fuel tank that happened to have a few seats bolted inside it. And it worked. Between the first crossing in mid-1943 and the last in July 1945, the service completed 271 crossings without a single loss of life, carrying 860 passengers across 2 years of wartime ocean. The lazy modern assumption is that these crews were limited by primitive fuel capacity, that they simply could not carry enough. That assumption misses the point entirely. They were not starved of volume, they were crushed by weight. The tanks could take more fuel than the airframe could lift. That is the wall, and it is the same wall standing in front of the A350 80 years later, just dressed in carbon fiber instead of riveted aluminium. The modern chapter opens in 2017, when Qantas publicly challenged Airbus and Boeing to build an aircraft that could fly non-stop from Sydney to London. Boeing proposed a version of its 777-8. Airbus answered with an even longer range version of the A350-1000, the A350-1000 ULR. What Airbus ultimately built in Toulouse comes down to 3 numbers, and once you hold them together, the whole equation snaps into focus. The first number is 322. The baseline A350-1000 is certified for a maximum takeoff weight of 322 tons, and that figure is the invisible ceiling over every ultra-long-haul departure. It does not matter how much tank volume you have if the wings cannot legally or structurally lift the mass. This is why the ULR needed needed significant structural reinforcement to its fuselage and landing gear just to sustain that weight, with 16 tons of extra kerosene concentrated in one section of the airframe. The second number is 170,000. With the rear center tank feeding into the standard wing and center wing tanks, total fuel capacity rises to over 170,000 liters, up from the standard A350-1000's 156,000. And unlike the removable auxiliary tanks used on other aircraft, this one is a permanent structural addition, integrated directly into the rear fuselage. It is not luggage, it is anatomy. The current flight test campaign exists largely to prove this organ works, verifying every pump, gauge, and pressure system, and confirming that the sequencing of fuel transfers between tanks performs exactly as planned by the fuel quantity management system. Moving tons of fuel around the airframe mid-flight changes the aircraft's balance, so even the order in which the tanks drain is choreographed. The third number is the one that explains everything, 6.9. The A350-1000 burns roughly 6.9 metric tons of fuel every hour, and that is one of the most efficient wide bodies ever built. Now run the loop. To fly 22 hours, you need an enormous fuel load. That fuel is weight. Weight raises your hourly burn. A higher burn means you need even more fuel, which is more weight, which raises the burn again. The loop only converges because the aircraft gets lighter as it flies, but the brutal consequence is unavoidable. To fly a 22-hour mission, the aircraft must carry so much fuel at takeoff that it consumes a significant portion of it just transporting the fuel needed for the end of the flight. You are burning fuel to carry fuel. Hour 1's fuel is spent hauling Hour 22's fuel a third of the way around the planet. This is why 20,000 liters buys only 1,000 miles. The tank is not inefficient. The mission is inherently self-taxing, and every liter you add pays a toll to every hour that remains. So the math closes, but only barely, and only if Qantas surrenders something on the other side of the ledger. What they gave up is inside the cabin, and it is the real story of this aircraft, because weight is a budget and passengers are weight too. Here is where the equation stops being physics and becomes business. Qantas has confirmed that its A350-1000 ULR will carry just 238 seats, making it the lowest density A350 flying anywhere in the world. For context, Airbus lists a standard 3-class A350-1000 at 375 to 400 seats. Qantas walked away from roughly 150 seats per flight. That is the Catalina trade in modern form, less extreme but the same species of sacrifice. In 1943, the fuel math left room for 3 passengers. In 2027, it leaves room for 238, and every one of those remaining seats has to earn more revenue to justify its place on the weight budget, which is why the cabin skews heavily premium, with a first-class suite designed specifically for these flights and cabins engineered to combat jet lag across a 20-hour-plus journey. What does the passenger get for all this? Time, mostly. Qantas estimates the non-stops will shave up to 4 hours off journeys that currently require a stop somewhere en route. 4 hours, plus the elimination of the descent, the transit lounge, the second takeoff, the second climb. And what does the airline risk? Exposure. Because so much of the takeoff weight is fuel, ultra-long-haul routes are unusually sensitive to oil prices, and a swing in fuel cost can turn a record-breaking route into a financial liability. The rear center tank made the range physically possible. The seat map is what makes it commercially survivable. One without the other is just an air show stunt. But if you walk away thinking the tank is the whole story, you have made the same mistake almost everyone makes. And remarkably, for a while, so did Airbus. Back in 2019, Airbus said that while the A350-1000 was the center of its bid for the Project Sunrise contract, it was not pitching a ULR configuration at all. The company believed a slightly higher maximum takeoff weight and a handful of small changes would be enough to meet Qantas's ambitions. Think about what that means. The tank tank that headlines every article about this aircraft, the feature in this video's title, was originally left out of the plan. It entered the design later as a concession, an admission that the weight and range equation would not close on optimism alone. The engineering community's own first instinct was the same as yours. Surely we can just stretch what exists. The math said no, and once the math forced the tank in, it kept collecting its toll everywhere else on the aircraft, down to places you would never think to look. The ULR is the launch platform for a new galley air cooling system with lighter and more efficient refrigeration units for long flights, saving around 300 kilograms, a technology that will now become standard across the entire A350 family. Sit with that. On a 322-ton aircraft, engineers redesigned the galley fridges to claw back 300 kilograms, less than 1/10,000th of the takeoff weight, and considered it worth certifying an entirely new system to get it. That is what the insane fuel math actually looks like up close. Not one dramatic tank, but an obsessive, aircraft-wide weight audit where a refrigerator is a rounding error worth hunting down, because every kilogram saved is a kilogram of fuel or payload or margin multiplied across 22 hours of burn. The route itself bends to the same arithmetic. Rather than the typical eastbound crossing of Australia or the long passage over India, the flights may head directly north from Sydney on a new polar routing, because when the budget is this tight, even geography gets renegotiated. The A350-1000 ULR is not a plane with a bigger tank. It is a 22-hour weight budget with wings, which brings us back to where we started, to that obvious little intuition that flying farther just means adding fuel. You can now see why it fails. Adding fuel was never the problem. Any engineer can bolt on volume. Carrying fuel is the problem, because fuel is weight, weight is burn, and burn eats the very fuel you added. The Catalina cruise of 1943 answered that equation by deleting everything: the insulation, the de-icing gear, the radio silence, not just for secrecy, but because every system was negotiable, all the way down to a passenger list you could count on one hand. The engineers of 2026 answered the same equation by engineering everything: composite wings that flex to trim drag, a reinforced fuselage, choreographed fuel transfers, and a lighter refrigerator. Opposite strategies, identical math. Same airline, 84 years apart, and Qantas knows it, which is why the project carrying this aircraft is named in honor of those wartime double sunrise flights. The rear center tank will get the headlines when these flights launch, and it has earned them. But you now know what that tank really is. It is the smallest visible piece of the achievement, the 20,000-liter tip of a design philosophy that fought for this route 300 kilograms at a time. The timeline from here is short. Tickets go on sale in February 2027. The first aircraft, named Vega, is delivered in April 2027. Daily non-stop flights between Sydney and London begin in October 2027. And somewhere in that first northern winter, high over the top of the world, passengers on a scheduled commercial flight will look out the window and watch the sun rise for the second time since they left the ground. In 1943, that view cost you a seat on a stripped-out flying boat running silent across an occupied ocean. In 2027, it comes with dinner service. The double sunrise is coming back, and this time it is on the timetable.